There's something you talk about all the time, and I think it's really important and people miss it.
It's the shoot the archer, not the arrow is the basic premise, right? And we've got all these counter UAS systems that are focused on shooting down the unmanned aerial part of the system, the vehicle, right? The drone, because it's seen as the hardest target. It's the most maneuverable. It's where the actual damage is done. But that drone has a person controlling it. Really, we have to put more time and effort into finding those controllers and neutralizing or destroying them.
This is Dan Magy, CEO of Firestorm and host of the Drone Wars podcast, where we're joined by Nathan Mintz, CEO of CX2.
Hey, Dan. Great to be with you.
Thanks for joining me today.
It's kind of the classic down select that you have in defense contracts between the new upstart that's higher risk and higher reward, more performance, and kind of the reliable, established contractor with much better basis of estimate predictability, right? So like that's how they've been setting up these contracts as long as time.
What do you think, does that work in our new world, or we need to have 4 or 5 companies or 20 companies competing on these contracts?
Well, if you read like what Shamp Sankar's put out with like First Breakfast and all that, I mean, that's obviously the direction they'd like to go, which is that the more competitors you allow into a competition, the more you can drive down price and drive up quality, right? And so there's a couple of approaches philosophically that the Department of Defense has been looking at with mid-tier acquisition reform. The first is that, well, we'll only select one, but we'll recompete it every couple of years.
Yep.
And that's what they're doing with like SRR and MRR,
yep.
Right? So like Skydio got knocked off and Teal got in there. And then the other approach is that you make the system where it's acceptable and compatible to use multiple different vendors for the same thing. Right. And so that's like, I think what they're kind of trying to do with the JADC2, ecosystem. It's not working very well, to be honest, but I think that's what they're trying to do, where they want multiple vendors, multiple APIs, multiple plugins. And it's a paradigm shift from the DoD, because they're used to, okay, we have one system, here's the operator manual. We train the 11 Bravo on it. It's done, right? And it's just not what they're used to, because frankly, that's not how it works anymore. There's lots of different software vendors and PC. It's all commodities, right? So just plug and play, just form, fit, and function compatible.
Do you think the new administration is going to drag the DoD down a more modern approach to acquisitions, or do you think they'll say all this stuff and then we'll actually end up where we still are?
I think they have to, because the simple reality is that unless they want 5 pseudo nonprofits, which are the big 5, which are about 70% of defense contracts, and if you add on Huntington Ingalls and General Atomics, Sierra Nevada, et cetera, it's probably 90%. Unless you want the same 10 companies that have no incentive for R&D or anything else pushing things forward, you're just not going to get any innovation, and we're not going to be able to stay ahead of the competition.
Yeah. And so how have you, you've started kind of 3 deep tech businesses, obviously with a defense focus on a couple of them, right? How did you decide kind of early in your career, early in your startup career, that you were going to build something that requires a lot of capital that would actually directly take on these folks?
Well, so I spent 14 years at Boeing and Raytheon, right? As a radar systems engineer, electronic warfare engineer, et cetera. Worked on Next Gen Jammer, the LQ-249. I worked on the F-18 radar. I worked on all sorts of radar warning receivers, satellite payloads, comm systems, you name it. Anything RF I worked on, even some EO stuff. And about 7-8 years ago, because Joe Lonsdale and I were friends all the way back from college, and he's the general partner at APC, one of the co-founders of Palantir. And he said, "Hey, Nathan, we're thinking of starting a defense vertical and a build program. Would you be interested? Do you have any ideas?" And as he's having this conversation with me, I'm looking up at my television screen, and an airport is being shut down in Gatwick, London, because there's a Schrodinger's drone was flying around. There was a drone flying, or maybe there wasn't a drone flying, or they don't know. But either way, the poor Brits had the whole airport shut down for 25 hours. And it turned out they had none of the tools available to first identify reliably the threat and then track its user. None of those systems really existed, at least in law enforcement's hands, let alone whatever the English equivalent of the FAA is.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to look into the counter UAS space. There was a report out at the time called the Center for the Study of the Drone at Bard College. They had a report on counter UAS systems. Because I said, well, why is it so hard? Like, we could track a ballistic missile going Mach 7 over the pole. And it turns out it's because these targets are really low and slow, and there's line of sight issues, and the transmitters are quite faint. And most of our infrastructure was designed to detect powerful, fast things going really far away at standoff distances rather than, low, slow, small, and close. And so it's a partnership. And I looked up, there was a report, this report had 200 entries in. I think Citadel was in there. You'd be happy to know. And
we made the cut.
What was the system you guys?
Titan.
I'm trying to remember what the name of it was. The one
Titan.
with the Titan. That's right. It's a good jammer. I mean, the special forces guys always spoke highly of it when I talked to them. Well, there was about 180 jammers and other detection systems. But the one thing that seemed like it would be really cool and would work well if you had more than one drone in the air was EMP. And there were only 4 or 5 systems out there that could do the EMP mission. One was Phaser, which is built by Raytheon. The other was Thor, which was an AFRL project.
Yep.
And they're all huge. They're $25 million. They're as big as my house. They're unreliable. It's some analog microwave source that they pulled out of a particle accelerator or something. And I'm like, okay, that's just not a fieldable system. So then it dawned on me. I go, wait, what are these field levels anyway? So I go get a textbook and look it up, and I go, that's not that far off from what you can get with gallium nitride nowadays. And I'd been working on it for a little while. I said, I bet you could scale the arrays to that. So I had this idea, and I called Bo Marr, who I'd worked with for a long time at Raytheon. We were friends. And I said, hey, Bo, how would we prove this in a white world environment so that we don't go to jail? So we got a bunch of drones at Walmart, played with them, and ran some signals across the boards and figured out how much power it would take to zap them. And I threw it into a pitch deck that I took up to Joe Lonsdale and AVC up in San Francisco. And I was expecting it to be a long conversation, and they offered me $3 million on the spot. And I'm like, wait a second, what? And Joe says, call Judy. He's known my wife for a long time too. Tell her you're quitting your job at Boeing and you're going to start this new company for me. What was it called again? Oh yeah, Epirus, right? So I put this together. We put together the original co-founders, took the team from 3 guys on rented desks up to an office with 20,000 square feet, couple SBIR phase 2 contracts, got a couple OTA contracts in there. And then, I kind of did everything I thought I could with that, decided to move on, do something else. So I got about halfway between Series A and Series B. And the company's done quite well since then. They've raised a couple $100 million. They've shipped about $150 million worth of product. They have systems that are operating overseas right now in evaluation. And it's sort of like, the new CEO, who, interestingly enough, used to be my boss at Raytheon, Andy Lowry. He was the chief engineer on ALQ-249 next to Jalen. He had describes it as a force field. We're making a force field that, anything electronic flies through, suddenly malfunctions, gets bricked, whatever, but it stops working, right? So in a lot of ways, it's the ultimate defensive weapon. It works against not just drones, but pretty much any electronics. You want to disable a cell phone, it can disable a cell phone. You want to disable infrastructure, disable infrastructure, vehicles. They've got a contract with the Navy to look at it for boats. So real exciting stuff there. So that was the first company. And then the second company, I had another friend of mine from Raytheon, Dr. Theodosius Sabatzoglu, who called me up and said, hey, Nathan, I think I have a way to make automotive radars have 5 times the resolution with a quarter of the size. And I knew a little bit about cars and AVs and all that, and I knew that autonomous systems were starting to introduce more and more advanced sensors. what I didn't know, what I did know also was that automotive manufacturers will literally give their left arm to get $1 out of the cost of every car because it's all pure profit margin for them, right? And so the software that we created, and we ended up calling the company Spartan because A, I had a great co-founder, and B, it was sparse array processing. And what we did is we made software that goes into other people's radars and makes them operate better. Okay. Ran that company for about 4 years. Handed it off to another friend of mine who ran it for a year. And then one of my co-founders took over as CEO and eventually sold the company last year to a tractor company. And it's going into their autonomous stack, John Deere. And
Cool.
So that company, that was the second company. And then the third one, which started earlier in 24, CX2, was kind of an outgrowth of conversations that happened with my co-founder Porter Smith, he was a former Army SOCOM pilot, had flown little birds, and he'd taken a lot of trips over to Ukraine, and he actually had a brother that served over there, and as a result, he'd seen kind of the changing nature of electronic warfare and how important the spectrum was as we transitioned away from soldiers holding rifles to drones with bombs. And like you look at the population crunch that both the Russians and the Ukrainians there has led to a massive proliferation of unmanned systems. And this has changed the way that the spectrum needs to be used and the type of emitters that are important in a way that we really haven't seen since the start of integrated air defenses, IAD systems in the 50s and 60s with the Russians, right? And so we call our approach suppression of enemy emitters and networks, destruction of enemy emitters and networks, as opposed to suppression of enemy air defenses. That's our primary focus here at Spartan, is how do we find, fix, and finish low-cost, distributed, ubiquitous emitters that exist on the modern battlefield, as opposed to the exquisite $100 million radars that most of our electronic warfare enterprise today is built to handle. So that's company number 3. I have a couple co-founders in that. In addition to Porter Smith that I mentioned, Mark Trefgarn, our president, was sold a software company called LiveRail to Facebook for $500 million back in the day, so knows a little bit about enterprise software. And then Lee Thompson, our other co-founder, built the whole comm stack for Starship at SpaceX. So, really exciting stuff. I've had the privilege of going on this journey 3 times now. And then a few other people, I advised a couple of other startups in the deep tech space. So, it's fun. I kind of feel like I found my ikigai, if you know what that is. For the listeners that aren't familiar with sort of like Japanese workforce philosophies, if you think of 4 concentric circles, it's what you like to do, what society will pay you to do, what you're good at, and then what's I think there was what you enjoy doing, right? And if you can find the intersection of all 4 of those, then you've really found satisfaction in life. We spent half to 2/3 of our life working, so it's better to do something that you love rather than makes you miserable.
Drone Wars is recorded from Firestorm's global headquarters in San Diego, California. Each episode is filmed inside our X-Cell, a modular industrial-grade manufacturing facility designed to be deployed anywhere in the world within 24 hours for on-demand drone production. Each week on the podcast, we bring you cutting-edge insights from unmanned industry leaders. Listen as they share the breakthroughs and technologies they're working on, the hard lessons they've learned, and the bold predictions about what the next 5 to 10 years in unmanned systems and advanced manufacturing have in store for us. Enjoying the show so far? Then be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now back to the show. I couldn't agree more. Let's pull on the CX2 thread a second here, okay? So there's something you talk about all the time, and I think it's really important and people miss it. It's don't try and shoot down all of the arrows, shoot the archer, right? Explain to me like how well that's resonated across the DoD with, what I'll call counter UAS 2.0 in full swing. I feel like every week there's another counter UAS company getting started.
Yeah. So, it's the shoot the archer, not the arrow is the basic premise, right? And our whole point is that we've got all these counter UAS systems that are focused on shooting down the unmanned aerial part of the system, the vehicle, right? The drone. Because it's seen as the hardest target, it's the most maneuverable, it's where the actual damage is done. But that drone has a person controlling it. And that's what makes it a system. There's a controller in there. There's communication relays for the more complex ones. And really, we have to put more time and effort into finding those controllers and neutralizing or destroying them. Now, some jamming systems do try and attack those bands, but particularly with the lines of sight that we're starting to, the ranges and the geometries that we're seeing in Ukraine, it's not always feasible to do that from the ground, right? So you really need to get autonomous platforms that are in the air that are sniffing for the controllers, and you're looking for the bands at which the uplink is occurring. Most work has been focused on disabling that uplink at the drone. We need to detect it, disable the downlink from the drone to the controller, or in some cases, destroy the controller, find, fix, and finish the controller. And that's really one focus area we have at CX2, which we file under. We put it under the category of suppression of enemy emitters and networks, destruction of enemy emitters and networks. In addition to that, we look at other families of emitters as well. Counter UAS jammers, for example, are very hard to detect, geolocate from the ground, especially from a single vantage point. You really need, multiple lines of bearing to intersect to find them. GPS jammers, which are a major threat, or any sort of PNT jammer to free operation of drones. They need to be tracked, geolocated, and neutralized. Okay, so. We're focused on how do you find all these low-cost emitters that are, anywhere from a few $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars a piece that don't make sense to launch a $4 million, like, no kidding, the Poles just paid $4 million a piece for a HARMARGM-ER missile. You want to save those. There are targets that need those. You're going to go up against a Buke, a SA-21 type of radar. Yeah, you need a $4 million HARMARGM that's going Mach 4. To go take it out. But for these other emitters, it just doesn't make economic sense. And what we've seen in this, in the last paradigm of the two wars, both in the Middle East and also here in with Ukraine, is that the cost asymmetry of what we spend in the West on systems to destroy these cheap threats from both either the Russians or from terrorists, or really the Iranians. We can't keep affording trading $1 billion missile for a $20,000 drone. It's stupid, right? So we're trying to figure out how you get that cost curve down by using small unmanned systems used as a trinable mass to destroy those emitters.
Perfect. I really appreciate you explaining that to me. And I want to pull on a thread you mentioned, right? You talked about the war in Ukraine and the war in Israel, right? You obviously talk to a lot of people in the DoD like I do. What do you think are a couple of the key things they're missing, right, when they're thinking about what the future of warfare looks like that have been on display in these two recent conflicts?
Well, I think one thing that we need to get our head wrapped around is that a lot of the solutions that are appropriate or make sense in a land war in Asia don't make sense in a sea war in Asia. And it's very likely that one of the future conflicts is going to be a sea war in Asia. So, for example, train following navigation is table stakes, but what are you going to do when you're over blue water, right? When GPS is denied. So, that's one example. I think a lot of people are over-indexing on tethered drones a lot because they're seeing the Russians use them sort of as a last resort. I don't see that as something, I saw one article that was put out that claimed it would be 30 to 40% of the drones built would be tethered. Now, that's not to say there aren't some niche applications. Like, I think there's a company here in the States that builds great tethered drones, Hoverfly, right? And they build some really nice tethered drones. And like, I think in lieu of an aerostaff for some applications, that may make sense. But to use them in an attack context, I think it's pretty fragile. Mm-hmm. So that's one lesson learned. I think the other thing that we're not recognizing is that I think there's still a lack of comfort with semi-autonomous or user on the loop type of guidance. Mm-hmm. I think like they're sort of over-indexing on FPV because they're comfortable. They can get comfortable with it. They can get comfortable with the fact that there's a human guiding it the whole way in. Well, we launch thousands of missiles that a human is not guiding it all the way in. You hit the pickle button and the missile goes, right? And we kind of need drones that are a little bit more like that, because otherwise, anytime the command signal is disrupted or spoofed, presents opportunities for the drone to be lost, right? Mm-hmm. Or even worse, turned against you. Mm-hmm. So I think, embracing greater levels of autonomy and also doing this at scale, going from a 1v1 type of scenario where you have one drone with one pilot, one controller, to one pilot, one controller with many drones, mm-hmm. and he only intervenes at the most critical parts of the mission. Mm-hmm. I see this thing, okay, yes, target that, and report back to me that it's been dispatched. I think that that is another piece of it. So if I had to kind of like summarize it, a couple lessons, I would say don't over-index on some of the lessons from Ukraine and the Middle East, even though it's very revealing that we have this major cost asymmetry and we don't have solutions. So that is a key lesson we have to learn. I think the 1VN and kind of like getting more comfortable with the drones being much more autonomous is another thing. And then how do we deal with blue water, and how do we deal with a signal dense environment? The most eye-opening statistic I saw was that in the Kursk offensive, there was something like 800 drones per square mile in the air at any given time. And if you think about that, if you look at like U.S. traditional SIGINT systems, which are meant to go look for big, powerful radars hundreds of miles away, we don't know how to separate that. We don't know how to deal with that. We don't know how to track that. So that's a major capability gap, is like, how do we solve the AWACS problem on the battlefield when thousands of drones are flying around?
Yeah. I mean, I remember in the Citadel days, you'd have Navy systems get overwhelmed with like 7 DJIs in the sky, right? So now multiply that by 100. That's what you could be dealing with. And they're not even flying on the Wi-Fi bands.
We do have some systems that can handle that in a defensive context. Yeah. So for example, Epirus is having an exercise out in the desert. I think it's this month or soon, mm-hmm. where they're going to shoot down 100 drones at once.
Cool.
They're going to track and shoot down 100 drones at the same time. But that's a defensive context. It's Leonidas, which is a fixed system, or it goes on a Striker. How do we deal with that from an offensive standpoint? Mm-hmm. What do I do when I'm playing 500 of my own drones mm-hmm. into the into Indian country and trying to find and identify find, fix, and finish targets simultaneously, and not lose control of those assets on the way in? I think that's a major lesson. Is like, how do we go from 1v1 to 1vn? Because that's really the power of all these systems, is they replace a soldier. And how do we go to, episode 1 of Star Wars, where was the Commerce Authority or whatever, the Chamber of Commerce, the guy presses the button and 1 million drones fly out? How do we get to that point?
Yep.
Because then we know we've won.
Yep.
And then it's just a matter of who can build drones faster and overwhelm the other guy. And that's a large part of what we're working at here at CX2. Of course, it's mostly focused on the spectrum. How do we provide night vision goggles for the invisible battlefield, if you will? The millennial generation, we kind of like, there's a cynicism that the Gen Z generation doesn't have. And I think the attraction to startups and defense and everything kind of comes from that. If they want to be part of a mission, they want us to try and do the impossible. I think people want to work on something that matters. And just some app that allows you to get catnip in the middle of the night delivered to your house doesn't feel like it matters that much. Whereas like the stuff we're working on, it's tangible, it's solving hard problems.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes every Tuesday wherever